Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook. These are all innocuous locations that elicit feelings of dread and terror in American citizens. Pundits are often looking for what could cause normal people to show these acts of violence in public. And one of the common causes that comes up is violent video games. So people often ask, is there a correlation between violent video game usage and aggressive behavior? Research does suggest that there is a concern for parents because of a link between violent video game uses and aggressive behavior, and because children that are at risk already for aggressive behavior are more likely to be affected by violent video game usage. So whenever I say that correlation exists between violent video game usage and aggressive behavior, what does that mean? There was a researcher in the early 2000s named Craig Anderson who did all the studies, early studies in violent video game usage, and what he found is that flags for aggressive behavior, things like aggressive thoughts, aggressive emotions, physiological changes within the body, antisocial behavior, were all heightened after playing violent video games. Another study by Anderson and Carnegie proved that violent video game usage was more likely to increase these aggressive tendencies as opposed to non-violent video game usage. The behavior was greatest in games that didn't enforce morality in the game, so games that allow you to kill without penalty or to steal without penalty were more likely to affect you. Another German study by Moeller and Krahe in 2009 showed that children exposed to violent video game during development stages were more likely to use aggressive behavior as a problem-solving technique. So one of the interesting things to come out of the research was the link between presence and aggression. And what presence is a level of immersion that happens within the game due to the visuals and audio stimulus that come out of it. And what they found is as presence increases, as this immersion increases, the aggressive level and tendencies also rise. There's two games that are often cited as causes of violence and aggression. One is the Doom series by id Software, and the other is the Grand Theft Auto series by Rockstar Games. Early on, the games were very crude, very pixelated. The camera was very pulled out so you can see details. As technology increases, the games become more realistic. Full cities, sounds, everything's so realistic. You're only going to see more aggressive tendencies rise with usage of these games. The second point is children that are at risk for aggressive behavior are more likely to show aggressive behavior after using violent video games. A study by Arriaga, Estevez, Carnejo, and Monteiro in 2002 showed that children that exhibited flags for aggressive behavior were more likely to see increased levels of aggressive tendency after playing it. Another study by Funk, Hagen, and others hypothesized that children who have issues internalizing their emotions were more likely to be desensitized by the use of violent video games, leading to real-life violence. A study by Olson, Kuttner, and Barrison showed that children with existing social development issues were more likely to use a game as a crutch. And if these violent video games were entered in as a stimulus during this development, they could lead to more antisocial behaviors in the house. So a study by Porter and Starcevic in 2007 actually recommended if children show any flags, any tendencies for aggressive behavior, to limit and prohibit violent video game usage altogether. So in conclusion, there is a link, a correlation between violent video game usage and aggressive tendencies. Technological advances will only strengthen this as presence increases. At-risk children have a heightened risk for developing these aggressive tendencies after using violent video games. So parents must take an active role in monitoring and prohibiting the use for kids that do show these tendencies. I'd like to open up the floor for questions.
What challenges are there to continued study and measurement of the correlation between violent video games and aggressive behavior?
Certainly. One of the studies, the one by Porter and Starcevic in 2011, actually remarked that it was very hard to keep up with technological advances with their research methodology. By the time that they had their methodology in place, oftentimes the games were 1 or 2 generations behind. In some cases, they were using equipment that was 10 years old. Whenever you have such outdated equipment, it's very hard to measure long-term effects of violent video games and aggression. Any other questions?
Do cultural differences have any effect on the observed correlation between violent video games and aggression?
There were actually 2 studies done. One was by Anderson and a group of Japanese researchers in 2008. Japan is considered a communal society, meaning that they rely on their family and social much more than Americans do. Americans are more individualists and isolationists. Japan also has similar video game usage rates compared to the Americans. What they showed is, as predicted, usage of violent video games did lead to rises in aggressive behavior in the Japanese students. Another study was done in Germany by Moeller and Krahe in 2009. Germans use video games at a rate lower than Americans and Japanese, but after exhibiting it, the same predicted rises in aggression were there as well. Thank you for your time today.